strange noises in my attic turned out horrifying. I thought moving into my own place would be exciting, until the scratching started. Let me start at the beginning. My name's Lila Harper. I'm 23, and I've just moved into what I thought would be my dream apartment. A tiny, charming house in a sleepy New England town. It was a kind of place with creaky floors, a wraparound porch, and enough character that Instagram influencers would probably fight over it. But for me, it was freedom. My first place alone, after living with my parents for as long as I could remember. I had my own space, my own rules, no roommates, no landlords peering over my shoulder. It felt like a fresh start. The day I moved in, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the cracked sidewalks and leaf-strewn yard. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and something else, old but not unpleasant. The previous owner had left most of the furniture, which was a blessing and a curse. The living room had a floral couch that probably belonged in the 70s, a rickety bookshelf, and a piano that hadn't been tuned since before I was born. I didn't care. It was mine. I spent hours unpacking boxes and arranging my things. My laptop went on the desk by the window, my favorite coffee mug in the kitchen, and my bookshelf carefully organized with all the books I'd been hoarding for years. Everything felt perfect, like the kind of perfect you see in movies before something terrible happens. By the time night fell, I was exhausted but satisfied. I made myself some instant noodles and poured a glass of wine, sitting on the porch to watch the stars. Small towns at night have a different kind of quiet, soft, almost comforting. I told myself that any sounds I heard inside the house would just be the usual settling noises of an old home. I went to bed around 11. The first thing I noticed was the attic. I knew there was one. The pull-down ladder was tucked into the ceiling in the hallway, but I hadn't thought much of it. Old houses have attics. They're dusty, dark, and full of forgotten things. I wasn't scared. Not yet. It started subtly, a faint scratching sound. At first, I assumed it was the house settling, wood expanding in the cool night air. I lay in bed, listening, and tried to convince myself it was nothing. But then it came again. A soft, deliberate scratching, like nails dragged slowly across old floorboards. I sat up. Okay, I muttered to myself, trying to sound braver than I felt. Old house. Probably mice, or a raccoon, or nothing. I rolled over and pulled the covers tighter around me. The sound stopped. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. Mice. Yeah, totally normal. But then it started again. Louder this time. And there was another noise layered on top. A muffled thump, like someone stepping lightly. My heart rate jumped. I told myself it was impossible, that nobody could be in the house. But the sound was real. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, creeping toward the hallway. The attic ladder was folded up neatly, the pull string dangling just out of reach. My hand trembled slightly as I tugged it down. The ladder creaked under my weight, a loud protest that echoed through the hallway. I froze, half expecting to see someone or something at the top. Nothing, just a dark attic above. I stayed there a few minutes listening. Nothing. My rational mind tried to assert itself. It's an old house. There's 1,000 ways the sound could be explained. You're fine. But deep down, something told me I wasn't. Over the next hour, I paced my apartment, checking windows, double-checking locks, trying to convince myself the noises weren't real. I even peeked up at the attic entrance with a flashlight. Shadows danced in the corner of my vision, and I jumped every time I thought I saw movement. Finally, I decided to set up a few cameras. Not because I thought someone was breaking in. No, that felt ridiculous. But because I wanted proof of whatever was causing the noises. Maybe it was a raccoon, maybe a squirrel, maybe something else. The next day, I went to the local hardware store and bought motion sensor cameras and a cheap audio recorder. I set them up around the living room, hallway, and pointing up at the attic ladder. Everything seemed normal during the day. The house was quiet, peaceful, almost too quiet. That night, I sat on my couch with my laptop, watching the camera feeds. Hours passed. Nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid. It's just a house. Then, at exactly 2:13 a.m., my laptop screen flickered. On the hallway camera, I saw the ladder twitch. Not a full descent, just a tiny shake like someone had brushed against it. I held my breath. The scratching started again. Soft at first, and then sharper, more deliberate. I could hear it even through the audio feed. And then, something impossible happened. A voice, my name, whispered, soft but clear. Lila. I nearly fell off the couch. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, shaking. I rewound the footage. Nothing. I played the audio recorder. Silence. My cameras had picked up nothing. I told myself it was my imagination. Sleep deprivation, the stress of moving, and overactive imagination. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave. My skin prickled, my hair stood on end. I felt wrong. I tried to sleep, but every creak, every sigh of the old house made me flinch. The scratching continued intermittently, always above me, always near the attic. I stayed awake most of the night, clutching my blanket and staring at the ceiling, half expecting something to emerge from the darkness. By morning, I was exhausted. My eyes were bloodshot and my nerves were frayed. I told myself I'd investigate properly in the daylight. Surely it would be nothing. Surely. During the day, the house seemed normal. Birds chirped outside. The sunlight streaming through the windows made it feel almost cozy again. I unpacked more boxes, made myself coffee, and even started cooking a proper breakfast. The attic seemed dormant, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. But that night, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows grew long, the scratching returned. And this time, it wasn't alone. Footsteps, soft, careful, deliberate, echoed in the ceiling. And then a faint whisper. Lila, come up. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to run, to hide, but my legs refused to move. The sound wasn't threatening, not exactly, but it wasn't friendly either. It was deliberate, calling me, testing me. I tried to rationalize. Maybe someone is trapped up there. Maybe it's a prank. But I live alone. There's no way. And even if there were, why would someone whisper my name? I sat on the couch, paralyzed, listening. The scratching grew more frantic, more purposeful. The footsteps padded slowly, then stopped. Silence. And then, my name again. Soft, drawn out. Lila. I don't know how long I sat there, trembling, unable to decide whether to investigate or call someone. My phone felt useless in my hand, my camera feeds offering no comfort. The house was alive, I realized, and it was awake. That first night ended with me curled up on the couch, blanket over my head, eyes squeezed shut, praying for sleep and safety that never came. I didn't know what was in the attic. I didn't know if it was human, animal, or something else entirely. All I knew was that my first night in my own home had been a mistake I couldn't undo. And the worst part, I wasn't even sure I wanted to know the truth. Every time I looked up at the ceiling, I felt it staring back. I thought the first night was bad. I thought maybe exhaustion and moving stress had played tricks on me. But by the second night in the house, I realized that the scratching, the whispers, the inexplicable noises weren't going away. They weren't quirks of an old house, not entirely. And the feeling that someone or something was watching me was getting harder to ignore. It started small, like the first night. A creak here, a scratch there. But soon, the noises became bolder. A book would fall off the shelf in the middle of the day, even though I was sure it had been secure. Drawers I hadn't touched would be slightly ajar. At first, I blamed myself, forgetting I'd closed them. But I started leaving small objects around intentionally, testing them. The next morning, items would be out of place. Always subtle, always just enough to unsettle me. And then came the cold drafts. I'd be sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, scrolling through my laptop, and suddenly I'd feel a chill brush against the back of my neck. The windows were closed, the doors were locked. There was no explanation, at least none that made sense. The shadows didn't help either. I swear they moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. A corner of the room that should have been empty would flicker with movement, just on the edge of my vision. I'd whip my head around and nothing would be there. Then I'd catch the reflection in the hallway mirror, something in the doorway. But when I looked again, it vanished. By the third day, I realized I was becoming obsessed. I couldn't stop thinking about the attic, about the noises, about whatever it was that had called my name. My work suffered. I barely touched my laptop for freelance assignments. I barely ate. My friends tried calling, but I avoided them, feeling like I couldn't explain what was happening without sounding insane. Finally, in desperation, I decided I needed answers. I went out into the crisp autumn air and knocked on a few doors in the neighborhood. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Reassurance, validation, maybe a little human contact. But what I found was even more disturbing than the noises themselves. An elderly woman named Mrs. Whitaker lived 2 houses down. She had lived in the town her entire life and seemed to know everything about every house in the neighborhood. When I mentioned my attic, her face went pale. "Oh dear," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "That attic, you shouldn't be messing around up there. So many years ago, a family lived in your house. The daughter, she disappeared one night. No one ever found her. People said it had something to do with the attic. Strange things, always at night." My stomach twisted. "Disappeared? As in vanished?" Mrs. Whitaker nodded. "Yes, the family moved soon after. Some say she was taken by, well, no one really knows, but people still say the attic isn't right. You should be careful." I thanked her and walked back to my house, my mind racing. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not that I expected to. The scratching began again around midnight, louder this time. It wasn't just above the ceiling anymore. It sounded like it was circling me, pacing along the roof, moving with a rhythm that made no sense. I started recording everything obsessively. Cameras, audio recorders, even my phone shoved into corners. I wanted proof, anything that could explain what was happening. But all the recordings came up blank. No scratches, no footsteps, no whispering. It was as if the house was aware of my attempts, mocking me silently. Sleep became a stranger. I would doze off in short bursts, only to wake with the sound of soft thumps, as if someone were walking just out of my line of sight. The shadows grew bolder. One night, I saw something crouching in the corner of my room, just long enough to catch a glimpse before it disappeared. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. I tried talking to my friends again. They laughed at first, telling me it was stress or maybe I was imagining things, but I could tell some of them were worried. They didn't say it, but I could see it in their eyes. They knew I sounded different, uneasy, frightened in a way I couldn't explain. I started exploring the house more during the day, trying to find any clue, any hidden detail that might make sense of the activity. That's when I found the journals, hidden behind a false panel in the attic's floorboard, a panel I hadn't noticed before. I hesitated, staring at the stack of yellowed papers. My instincts screamed to leave them alone, but curiosity got the better of me. The journals were old, brittle, written in cramped, nearly illegible handwriting. Some pages detailed mundane family life, but others were darker. References to whispers, shadows, and someone, or something, living in the attic. Rituals, instructions, warnings. I didn't understand it all, but I understood enough to know I wasn't imagining the danger. Someone in this house had feared the attic, feared what lived there. And now, so did I. The next few nights were a blur. I stayed awake, jumping at every creak and scratch. My food went cold, my laundry piled up, my sanity stretched thin. I started talking to myself just to stay grounded, repeating, "It's fine, it's just a house, it's nothing, it's nothing." But the voices kept coming, whispering, calling, always my name. Then came the first truly terrifying encounter. I was sitting on the couch trying to make sense of the journals when I heard it. The attic door. Slowly, deliberately, it creaked open. I froze, my eyes locked on the ladder as it lowered itself, the attic yawning like a mouth in the darkness. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, my body frozen with fear. And then I saw it. A shadowy figure, fleeting, darker than the night itself, standing at the edge of the attic. It didn't move like a human. It didn't breathe like one either. And yet, I knew, without a doubt, that it was aware of me, watching me, waiting. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The figure lingered for a moment that stretched into eternity, then disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared, swallowed by the darkness above. The attic door slammed shut with a deafening crash that shook the floorboards beneath me. I jumped back, knocking over a chair. My heart was racing, my hands trembling uncontrollably. For the first time, I realized that I was not just living in an old house. I was sharing it with something that didn't belong, something that had been here long before me, and likely would remain long after. I spent the rest of that night sitting in the living room, too terrified to sleep, too exhausted to think clearly. I couldn't stop staring at the ceiling, the attic, the shadows. Every creak, every draft, every flicker of movement sent me into a panic. By morning, I was a mess. My eyes were bloodshot, my skin pale, my hands shaking. I hadn't slept more than an hour, maybe two, and even then it had been broken sleep. I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was in the attic wasn't going away. It was getting bolder, testing me, watching me, waiting for something. I didn't know if I could survive another night, but I also knew I couldn't leave. Not yet. Something about the attic demanded my attention, whether I wanted it or not. And I had a feeling that the first terrifying encounter was only the beginning. I knew I shouldn't open it, but curiosity won. By the third week in the house, I was a shell of myself. Sleep deprivation had taken over my life, and I could barely focus on anything other than the attic. Every sound, every shadow, every draft made my heart hammer like I'd just run a mile. I was exhausted, but exhaustion wasn't enough to stop me anymore. I had to know what was up there. I had to see it for myself. I spent the day preparing. I cleared space in the living room, setting up cameras, audio recorders, even my phone on tripod mode. I packed a small bag with essentials, flashlight, a knife I wasn't entirely sure I'd ever use, the journals I found before, and a bottle of water. I wasn't leaving until I knew the truth. Night came, as it always did, draping the house in shadows that seemed almost alive. I sat on the couch for a while, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the noises. I didn't have to wait long. The scratching started around 11:17 p.m., faint at first, then growing sharper. Footsteps followed, circling the room, pacing just above me, as if whatever was in the attic was testing my patience. "Lila," the voice whispered, low, soft, but unmistakable. My stomach dropped, my throat went dry, my hand clutched the flashlight like a lifeline. "I'm here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, more to convince myself than anything else. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the ladder. My legs trembled under me, every muscle tense, my heart hammering like a jackhammer in my chest. I reached for the pull string, my fingers brushing the rough rope. I paused. "Don't do it!" my rational mind screamed. "Walk away. You're going to regret this." But the rational voice had been silent for weeks. Curiosity, that insatiable need to know, won. I pulled. The ladder unfolded slowly, creaking and groaning as if protesting my intrusion. Dust fell from the ceiling, tickling my arms. The attic smelled musty, heavier than before, almost like wet earth mixed with something metallic. I shined my flashlight upward. The shadows were deeper than usual, almost solid in their darkness. The moment I stepped onto the first rung, a cold gust of air hit my face, making me stumble backward. My flashlight flickered. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if whatever was in the attic knew I was here, knew I was about to cross the threshold. I climbed slowly, every creak of the ladder echoing in the stillness. The attic door loomed above me like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. My hand trembled as I reached the top. I hesitated, listening, silence. Then a whisper, sharper this time. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. The voice didn't sound far away. It sounded close, almost in my ear. I could feel the words brushing against my skin. My stomach turned, my hands shook. But I couldn't stop now. I had to see. I pushed the door open. The attic was bigger than I expected, the ceiling slanting in strange angles, the floorboards uneven and creaking under my weight. Dust motes floated in the beam of my flashlight, shimmering like tiny ghosts. But the most disturbing part wasn't the room itself. It was what was inside. Old furniture covered in white sheets, trunks, boxes, and piles of forgotten belongings. But scattered among the mundane were objects that made my skin crawl. Candles, long since melted and blackened, surrounded by strange symbols scratched into the floor. Journals, with entries that grew increasingly erratic, dark, obsessive. Mentions of voices, of shadows, of someone or something watching. One page ended with a warning in smeared ink. Do not enter, do not wake it. Lila must never come here. I stumbled backward. The name froze me in place. Lila, my name, written in someone else's hand decades ago. I swallowed hard, heart racing. Who was watching me? Then the objects around me began to move. Not gently, not like a breeze. Books slid off shelves, boxes toppled, papers fluttered like wings. My flashlight swung wildly as I tried to focus, illuminating shadows that seemed to twist and stretch along the walls. The air grew colder, each breath a visible puff in front of me. And the voice, it wasn't just whispering anymore. It was angry, sharp, harsh, demanding. You shouldn't have come. I stumbled backward, tripping over a box. The shadows converged in the corner of the room, solidifying into a dark shape that I couldn't comprehend. It shifted, elongated, filling the space with a presence so oppressive I felt like I couldn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to run, to escape, but my legs refused. Fear rooted me in place. I fumbled for the journals, trying to read anything that might explain what I was seeing. The pages described rituals, protective wards, attempts to trap or banish whatever had taken residence in the attic. But they also spoke of failures, of people disappearing, of darkness winning. I could feel it pressing in on me, almost as if the attic itself were alive, a predator circling its prey. A loud crash made me jump. One of the covered trunks had toppled over on its own, revealing a tangle of what looked like old clothes. Or was it something else? The shadows surged closer, swirling with a force that defied gravity. Papers flew violently around me, some tearing themselves apart midair. Candles ignited spontaneously, flickering with greenish flames that cast grotesque shadows along the walls. I screamed. Not a polite, controlled scream, but a raw, terrified sound that echoed through the attic and down into the house below. And then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. Silence. Cold. Stillness. My flashlight beam caught movement at the far end of the attic. A figure, or something resembling a figure, stood there. Dark, featureless, radiating hostility. I couldn't tell if it was human, I couldn't tell if it was alive, but I knew, without a doubt, that it was aware of me. I backed away, heart hammering, knocking over another box in my frantic retreat. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, waiting, watching, mocking. My hand hovered over the pull string to retreat down the ladder, but curiosity, stupid, dangerous curiosity, made me pause. I wanted to see it, to understand. I wanted to prove that I wasn't losing my mind. Then the shadow moved, a swift, fluid motion that made my blood run cold. It surged forward, faster than I thought possible, and in an instant it was at the edge of my vision, then gone again. I stumbled backward, falling onto the floorboards, knocking the flashlight across the room. It clattered loudly, spinning light across the walls, catching glimpses of objects that shouldn't have been there. Fingers? Faces? The beam landed on something writhing beneath a sheet, but when I focused, it was gone. Only dust and the faint smell of decay remained. My chest heaved. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The journals lay scattered around me, pages fluttering in the still air, and then I saw it. At the far end of the attic, just beyond the shadows, a pair of eyes. Or maybe more than eyes. They glowed faintly, impossibly, filled with a hatred that made my stomach turn. I scrambled backward, my hand finally finding the ladder. I climbed down as fast as I could, hearing whispers all around me. They weren't calling my name this time. They were laughing, mocking, hissing threats I couldn't comprehend. I slammed the ladder shut behind me, but the attic door trembled as if the thing inside were trying to get out. The scratching, the thumps, the whispers, they didn't stop. I could feel them all around me, pressing against my senses, invading my mind. I collapsed onto the couch, shaking uncontrollably. I had gone up there, faced it, and lived to tell about it. But I knew, deep down, this was far from over. The house had shown me a fraction of its true nature, and I feared with every fiber of my being that the next encounter would be worse. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. Every shadow, every creak, every breath of wind made me flinch. I knew one thing for certain. The attic was alive, and it was not finished with me. And I had a feeling that the next time I opened that door, whatever was in there would be waiting. Ready. I finally understood, and I wished I hadn't. After weeks of sleepless nights, whispers, shadows, and objects moving on their own, I realized there was only one way forward. The attic wasn't just a place. It was a presence, a living, breathing darkness that had existed long before I ever moved in. And now, somehow, it had claimed me. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't run anymore. I had to confront it. Not because I was brave, but because I had no choice. The house had me trapped in a cycle of fear, and the only way to end it was to face the source. I packed a small bag again. Flashlight, journals, phone, a knife for protection, and a heavy scarf to cover my head if it came to that. My hands trembled as I approached the attic ladder. The air felt thicker than usual, colder, almost wet. I could hear it before I even reached the ladder. Faint scratching, like nails on wood, circling, moving, testing me. I hesitated, gripping the rope tightly. Don't do it. Just leave. But I didn't listen. Curiosity and terror mingled, forcing me upward. I pulled down the ladder, each creak and groan echoing through the house. My flashlight flickered as I climbed, illuminating the dust and debris that floated like tiny ghosts in the air. When I reached the attic, I paused at the threshold. I remembered the journals, the strange symbols, the warnings. But I also remembered the whisper that had called my name, so soft and deliberate. It wasn't just the attic, it was alive. And now, it was waiting for me. I pushed the door open. The room felt different this time. Heavier, almost viscous, like the air itself was pressing against me. Shadows clung to the corners, twisting unnaturally, forming shapes that weren't quite human. My flashlight beam bounced across the floor, catching glimpses of old furniture, trunks, and piles of forgotten belongings. But something new glimmered in the dark. Objects I hadn't seen before. Candles that had never been there, freshly melted, casting flickering green light. Symbols etched into the floor and walls, dark and intricate, almost pulsating as if they had a heartbeat. And in the center of it all, a mirror, old, tall, and cracked, reflecting not my image, but the shadows themselves. I approached cautiously. My reflection in the mirror shifted unnaturally, stretching, twisting, until I saw it. The figure, the presence that had haunted me, stood behind me. Dark, featureless, taller than any human should be, radiating malice and hunger. Its head tilted slightly as if examining me, assessing me. I tried to run. My legs moved, but the air thickened, almost solid, holding me in place. The shadows on the walls surged toward me, whispers filling my mind, not calling my name this time, but speaking in a language I didn't understand. Some words were threats, others promises of pain. I felt them in my chest, a cold pressure that made my lungs ache. Desperation pushed me forward. I grabbed one of the journals, flipping through pages until I found what I hoped would be answers. The previous occupants had documented the house's dark secret, a ritual performed decades ago to trap a spirit that had once been human, twisted by jealousy, anger, and forbidden practices. They had failed. The attic had become a prison for the entity, feeding on fear and curiosity. It had survived, growing stronger with each person who dared enter. And now it had me. I realized the whispers, the scratches, the shadows. They weren't just haunting me. They were feeding on my terror, learning my patterns, testing my reactions. And now it was showing itself fully, stronger, more aggressive. I had to act. I remembered a passage in the journal. The only way to survive was to confront the entity directly, but not with weapons or rage, only acknowledgement. The previous families had tried force, fire, avoidance, and all had failed. Fear empowered it. Recognition, without fear, was the key. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold pressing in on me. My voice shook, but I spoke. I see you. I know what you are. I'm not afraid of you. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air shifted, the shadows recoiling slightly. The figure loomed taller, its form shimmering, almost liquid. Its whisper stopped, replaced by silence so complete it was deafening. I could feel it staring at me, testing my resolve. You, it hissed, a sound like wind through dead trees. You understand? I do, I whispered, stepping closer. I'm not your prey. I see you. It paused, and for the first time, I felt the faintest hesitation from it. The shadows around it flickered, unsteady. I realized that acknowledging its presence, speaking to it without fear, was weakening it. But I couldn't let my resolve falter, not now. I slowly circled the attic, keeping my eyes on it, the flashlight illuminating the symbols and journals. The figure followed my movements, mimicking me in the mirror, but every step I took with courage seemed to shrink its power. I wasn't just observing, I was asserting myself, claiming space. Then the floorboards groaned. One of the old trunks toppled over violently, spilling its contents, old clothing, more journals, and a bundle of letters tied with black ribbon. I froze, shining the flashlight on them. The letters revealed a terrifying truth. Every person who had lived here before me had succumbed to the entity, gone missing, disappeared into the shadows of the attic, leaving behind warnings and fragmented journals. I realized that my survival depended on breaking the cycle, not following it. I spoke again, louder this time. You do not control me. You do not define me. I am here, and I will leave when I choose. The figure recoiled, the shadows writhing violently. I stumbled backwards, nearly falling, but I kept my eyes on it. And then, just as suddenly as it had become aggressive, it froze. The air lightened, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. I could breathe, but I wasn't safe yet. I had to escape. I grabbed my bag and ran toward the ladder, keeping my eyes on the entity. It surged toward me, faster than I expected, shadows reaching out like fingers. I jumped onto the ladder, pulling myself down as fast as I could. The ladder groaned, the door threatening to close on me, but I shoved it shut with all my strength. I landed on the floor, heart pounding, lungs burning. The whispers had ceased, but the memory of them lingered in my mind like a cold hand. I scrambled to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even lie down. I sat in the corner, clutching the journals, listening to the silence that felt almost unnatural. Morning came, gray and quiet. The house seemed ordinary again. The shadows were normal. The creaks returned to normal old house noises, but I knew it was lying in wait. Dormant for now, patient. The attic had revealed itself to me, but I had survived for now. I couldn't stay here. I knew that. But I also knew I couldn't leave the journals behind. They were proof, warning, and guidance all in one. I had to take them with me, but I couldn't yet. Not until I had a plan, not until I knew how to truly end this. I stepped outside briefly, the autumn air filling my lungs. I was alive. I had survived, but the feeling of being watched never left. Even in the sunlight, even with neighbors walking by, I could sense it, lurking just beyond perception, waiting. And I knew the truth. The attic was not empty. The entity was patient, clever, and it would always remember me. I finally understood the depths of its hunger, its malice, its history, and I wished with every fiber of my being that I had never looked up, never entered the attic, never acknowledged it. But curiosity had won, and now I bore the consequences. Even as I write this now, years later, the fear lingers. I can't explain what I saw fully, and I can't forget the feeling of those eyes on me, of that darkness breathing and waiting in the shadows. And I know, somewhere in that old New England house, it still waits, patient, hungry, watching. Because once it knows you, it never forgets. All right, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.